Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Speak Up. I'm Ryan, your host, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Priya. On Speak Up, we're all about helping you improve your communication skills and boost your confidence in every conversation. And today, we've got a really exciting topic lined up: how to talk with strangers. Now let's face it, starting a conversation with someone you don't know can be intimidating, but it's also a skill that can open doors to new opportunities, friendships, and experiences. Whether you're at a networking event, standing in line at a coffee shop, or even just sitting next to someone on a train, knowing how to strike up a conversation can be a game changer. And today we're going to help you master that skill step by step.
That's right, Ryan. Talking to strangers is something we all have to do from time to time, but let's be honest, most of us feel awkward about it, right? Maybe you're worried about running out of things to say, or that the conversation will just fall flat. Well, today's episode is all about making those first steps easier. We're going to talk about why it feels so hard, practical ways to break the ice, and how to keep the conversation flowing naturally. Plus, we'll share some real-life examples and tips that you can start using right away. So, if you've ever struggled to chat with someone new, this episode is for you.
By the end of today's episode, you'll feel confident enough to talk to anyone, whether it's a stranger at a party, someone in a work setting, or even just striking up a casual conversation on the street. We'll also dive into the psychology behind why it feels awkward and give you some super easy practical strategies to make it feel a whole lot smoother. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's dive into how to talk with strangers, right here on Speak Up. All right, let's dive in. So, we've all been there. You see someone you'd like to talk to, but your mind starts racing, your heart beats a little faster, and you feel that awkward hesitation creeping in. Why is it so hard to talk to strangers? I think for a lot of people, the fear of rejection or making a bad first impression is what holds us back. We worry about saying the wrong thing or just sounding, well, weird, right? It's like we build this conversation up in our heads and think it has to go perfectly, or else it's a failure. I remember going to a networking event early in my career and just standing there, overthinking every possible way to approach someone, and of course I ended up talking to no one. We make it so much harder than it really needs to be.
That's so relatable, Ryan. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have experienced the exact same thing. The truth is, this nervousness we feel around strangers isn't just about the conversation itself. It's about all the thoughts we have before we even open our mouths. There's actually some psychology behind this. Researchers have found something called the liking gap, which means we tend to underestimate how much other people will like us after an initial conversation. We think people are going to judge us harshly, or that they'll find us boring or awkward. But in reality, most of the time, people actually enjoy conversations more than we expect. It's wild how much we psych ourselves out before even giving it a shot.
That's so true, Priya. And I think a lot of us forget that other people are probably feeling the exact same way. We're all human, right? Everyone's worried about how they come across in some way or another. I mean, how many times have you been in a social setting and thought, I really want to talk to that person, but they probably don't want to talk to me? When in reality, they're probably thinking the same thing. It's just that fear of the unknown that holds us back. And speaking of that, a big part of it is that we're stepping into unfamiliar territory. We don't know how the other person will react, and that unpredictability can make us feel uncomfortable.
Exactly, Ryan. And that fear can be paralyzing if we let it take over. But here's the thing. Once you realize that everyone feels some level of nervousness in social situations, it becomes a lot easier to overcome it. You're not alone in feeling this way. And the more you push yourself to engage with strangers, the easier it gets. It's like building a muscle. The key is to shift your mindset. Instead of worrying about being judged or rejected, think of it as a chance to connect and maybe learn something new. I mean, who knows what kind of amazing conversation could come out of just saying, hello. It's about embracing that possibility rather than fearing the worst.
All right. So now that we've talked about why it's hard to approach strangers, let's get into the practical stuff. How do you actually start a conversation? Because I know, Priya, a lot of people think, Okay, I get it. I need to overcome my fear. But what do I actually say? And that's totally fair, right? I mean, when you're standing next to someone at a coffee shop or at a party, that first line can feel like the hardest part. But it really doesn't have to be. One of the best and simplest ways to break the ice is using your surroundings. You can literally comment on what's happening around you. Maybe you're both waiting for your coffee. You could just say something like, "Wow, this line is longer than I expected, huh?" Or, "The coffee here is great, isn't it?" It doesn't have to be deep. The point is just to get the ball rolling.
Absolutely, Ryan. It's all about taking that first step. What I love about starting with something in the environment is that it's a shared experience. You're both in the same place, so using that common ground makes it feel natural. It's also less intimidating because you're not diving straight into a personal question or something heavy. It's just a casual, simple way to start the conversation. I remember a time I was at a conference, and I really wanted to talk to someone who was sitting near me. I felt awkward at first, but I noticed we were both holding the same notebook from one of the booths. So I just said, "These notebooks are really nice, aren't they?" And boom, that was enough to start a 20-minute conversation about the event and what we both were interested in. It's often the small, light comments that lead to something much bigger.
Exactly. It's funny how just noticing something small can open up a bigger conversation. And like you said, it doesn't have to be anything profound. The goal is just to break the ice and give the other person a reason to respond. Another good strategy is asking open-ended questions. If you're at a social event, instead of saying, "Hi," and leaving it at that, you could ask something like, "How do you know the host?" Or, "What brings you to this event?" Those questions are great because they give the other person a chance to share more, and that opens up different paths for where the conversation can go. It's much better than a yes or no question, which can stop the chat before it even starts.
Totally. And you know what else works? Genuine compliments. People love to be complimented, but the key is to make it authentic and specific. Like if you notice someone wearing a unique piece of jewelry, you could say, "That necklace is beautiful. Where did you get it?" It's flattering, but it also gives the other person an opportunity to talk about themselves. And when you get someone talking about something they care about, it makes the conversation flow naturally. Just the other day, I complimented someone on their funky shoes at a gallery event, and we ended up having this amazing chat about art and travel. You never know what direction the conversation might go when you start with a thoughtful comment.
That's a great tip, Priya, and it really shows how easy it can be. And like we said earlier, it doesn't have to be perfect. People aren't expecting you to come in with the best conversation starter ever. Just make the effort to connect. If you notice something interesting about someone or your surroundings, comment on it. It's way better than staying silent and overthinking. And hey, if the conversation doesn't go anywhere, that's okay too. You gave it a shot, and that's what matters. Every conversation doesn't have to turn into a deep connection.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the easier it gets. You'll start to feel more comfortable the next time you need to talk to someone new. So, whether you're at a social event, on public transport, or even just waiting in line, remember these tips. Use your environment, ask open-ended questions, and don't be afraid to throw in a genuine compliment. All of these are simple but effective ways to break the ice and get the conversation started.
Okay, so now you've broken the ice. You've started talking, and maybe you've commented on the surroundings or asked a great question. But here's the next big challenge. How do you keep the conversation flowing? I think this is where a lot of people get stuck. They're like, "Okay, I've said something. Now what?" You don't want those awkward pauses or moments where you're both just staring at each other, right? But keeping the conversation going doesn't have to be difficult. One thing that's really helped me is learning to show genuine curiosity about the other person. People love to talk about themselves, and if you're truly interested in what they're saying, the conversation will keep moving naturally. For example, if someone mentions something interesting, maybe they say, "Oh, I just moved to the city," you could ask, "Oh, where did you move from? How's the transition going?" It gives them a chance to share more, and before you know it, you're deep into a conversation.
Exactly, Ryan. That's such an important point. Curiosity is key. People really respond when they feel like you're actually interested in them, not just going through the motions. And one of the best ways to show that you're engaged is through active listening. We've all been in conversations where it feels like the other person is just waiting for their turn to speak, right? But when you're actively listening, you're nodding, you're making eye contact, you're giving little verbal cues like, "Oh, really?" Or, "That's so interesting, tell me more." These small things let the other person know that you're genuinely paying attention, and it encourages them to keep talking. I remember meeting someone at a dinner party, and she was super passionate about her career in wildlife conservation. Instead of just nodding along, I asked follow-up questions like, "What inspired you to get into that field?" And, "What's been the most rewarding experience for you?" The conversation flowed effortlessly from there.
Absolutely. And it's funny because sometimes the simplest follow-up questions can lead to the most interesting conversations. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just showing that you're engaged and that you care about what the other person is saying can keep things moving. Another great technique that I've found useful is something called mirroring. It's when you subtly match the other person's energy and communication style. If they're more laid back and casual, you can reflect that by keeping things light and relaxed. If they're excited about something, match their enthusiasm. It creates this sense of connection and makes the conversation feel more natural. I had this happen at a work event where I was talking to someone who was really animated about a project they were working on. So I matched their energy, leaned into the conversation, and it felt like we were totally in sync.
Yes, I love mirroring, and it's such an effective way to build rapport. It's almost like you're saying, "I'm on the same page as you." But it has to be subtle. You don't want to mimic them too obviously. Another way to keep the conversation flowing is to focus on shared experiences or common ground. It gives you both something to relate to and build on. Let's say you're both at a conference, for example. You can ask something like, "What's been the highlight of the event for you so far?" It not only keeps the conversation going, but also gives you insight into what they're interested in, which you can follow up on. I remember doing this at a networking event, and someone mentioned a keynote speaker they were excited about. We ended up discussing the talk for a while, and that naturally led into other topics we both cared about.
That's a great point, Priya. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it in our heads, but really, keeping a conversation going is about staying engaged, listening actively, and finding those little connections along the way. If you're genuinely curious about the other person and you're listening closely to what they're saying, the conversation will pretty much keep itself going. And if you ever do hit a lull or a pause, that's okay too. A quick follow-up question or a light comment can easily get things back on track. So, whether you're chatting with someone new at a party or meeting a colleague for the first time, just remember to be present and curious. You'll be surprised how easy it is to keep the conversation flowing once you do that.
Exactly. And don't be afraid of those pauses. Sometimes a little silence can actually give both of you time to reflect on what's been said and naturally lead into the next part of the conversation. So, to sum it up, stay curious, ask follow-up questions, and really listen to what the other person is saying. Use their energy to guide your responses and find those small common points to build on. The more present you are in the conversation, the smoother it'll flow. Trust me, once you get into that rhythm, talking to strangers can feel effortless.
So, we've covered how to start a conversation and how to keep it flowing. But there's one more important part of this process that we can't ignore: how to politely exit a conversation. Now, this can feel just as tricky as starting one, right? You don't want to seem rude or make the other person feel like you're trying to get away, but sometimes you just need to move on, whether it's at a social event, a party, or even in a casual setting. I think one of the key things here is to be honest but kind. There's no need for a dramatic excuse, just something simple and respectful. For example, you could say something like, "It's been really great talking with you, but I need to catch up with a few more people." That way, you're making it clear that you enjoyed the chat, but you also have other things to attend to. How do you usually handle it, Priya?
Yeah, Ryan, I totally agree. Exiting a conversation gracefully is just as important as entering it. You don't want to leave someone feeling like you're brushing them off. I found that being direct yet polite works really well. Like you said, acknowledging that the conversation has been enjoyable is key. One of my go-to lines is, "This has been such a great chat, but I've got to get going. I hope we can connect again soon." It's polite, it's clear, and it leaves the door open for future interaction if that's something you want. It's also important to gauge the context. If you're at a work event, you might want to exchange contact information before leaving. I'll often say something like, "It was really nice meeting you. I'd love to stay in touch. Do you have a business card or LinkedIn?" It makes the exit feel smoother and professional.
That's a great point, Priya. I love the idea of leaving the door open for future interactions, especially if the conversation was interesting or could lead to something down the road. But I also think it's important to remember that not every conversation needs to lead somewhere long-term. And that's okay. Sometimes you're just having a casual chat, and it's fine to end it without feeling like you need to commit to more. One of the easiest ways to do that is to thank the person and wish them well for the rest of the event or the day. Something like, "It was really nice talking with you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." That way, you're ending on a positive note, but without necessarily promising to follow up.
Exactly, Ryan. And I think another important point is to keep your exit brief but friendly. If you drag it out too long, it can become awkward, right? You don't need a lengthy explanation for why you're leaving. Just something short and polite works perfectly. I also like to use context when exiting. If the event is winding down, for instance, you can say, "I'm going to grab a drink before they close the bar," or "I'm going to check out that last session." It gives a natural reason to move on, and most people will understand. I've even used the classic, "I need to step outside for some fresh air," and it works every time. The key is to be kind but clear, so the person doesn't feel like you're just trying to escape.
Yeah, totally. And you know what? Most people won't take it personally at all. Everyone's been in a situation where they've needed to wrap up a conversation. As long as you're polite and show some appreciation for the chat, you're good. If you do it with a smile and a warm tone, it's hard for anyone to feel offended. One thing I try to remind myself is that ending a conversation doesn't mean you're rejecting the person. It just means the interaction has run its course, and that's totally normal. So whether it's at a networking event, a party, or even just a random conversation on the street, don't stress too much about it. It's all about leaving on good terms and making the exit as smooth as possible.
Exactly, Ryan. I think the main thing for our listeners to remember is that exiting a conversation is just a natural part of social interactions. You don't have to feel bad about it. As long as you're polite and respectful, it's no big deal. The person will probably appreciate your honesty, especially if they need to move on too. So, to recap for everyone, keep your exit brief, be kind, and if it feels right, leave the door open for future interactions. Simple, but effective. And once you get comfortable with it, you'll see how easy it is to navigate these moments without any awkwardness.
So now that we've covered how to start a conversation, keep it going, and gracefully exit when you need to, it's time to bring all of this together with something really practical: role-playing. We've been talking a lot about what to do, but putting it into practice is where the magic happens. Just like with any skill, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. So, Priya, how about we play out a couple of scenarios for our listeners and show them how these tips can be used in real life?
Absolutely, Ryan. I think that's a great way to show how easy and natural these conversations can be once you get the hang of it. Okay, let's start with a simple scenario. Let's say we're at a coffee shop and I'm sitting at a table next to you. I'm a stranger and you want to start a conversation with me. How would you break the ice in that situation?
All right, here goes. Pauses to imagine the scene. "Hey, I couldn't help but notice your laptop sticker. Are you a photographer? I love photography too, but I'm still pretty amateur. Do you shoot professionally?"
Oh, yeah. I actually just do it as a hobby, but I've been getting more serious about it lately. I mostly take landscape photos when I travel.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite spot you photographed? I've been thinking about going to the mountains next time I get a chance to travel.
See how simple that was? Ryan used an observation, something unique like my laptop sticker, as an entry point. And then he asked an open-ended question that got me talking about something I'm interested in. It's a perfect way to start a conversation without feeling forced. And the best part is, conversations like this can go in so many directions. Ryan could have followed up with more questions about photography or travel, and that could have easily led to a longer chat.
Exactly. And the more you do this, the more comfortable you'll get with spotting these little opportunities to start a conversation. It's really just about paying attention and staying curious. Now let's try another scenario. Priya, let's say we're at a networking event and I'm new to the group. How would you kick off a conversation there?
All right, picture this. We're at a conference and I see you standing near the coffee station. I'd start with something like, "Hey, how are you finding the conference so far? Have you been to any interesting talks?" It's simple, but it's relevant to the environment we're in.
Yeah, I actually just came from a really great session on digital marketing. What about you? Have you caught any talks yet?
I did. I went to one on personal branding this morning that was super insightful. I took so many notes. Are you in marketing yourself? So here, I've kept the conversation going by asking a follow-up question based on what Ryan mentioned, and I'm giving him more opportunities to share about himself. At the same time, I'm showing genuine interest in the topic he brought up. It makes the conversation feel smooth and engaging.
That's a great example, Priya, and I hope our listeners can see how easy it is to get into a natural conversation just by being curious and open. The best way to get good at this is really through practice. You don't need to wait for a big event or a perfect situation. Start small. Practice with a barista, with someone waiting in line next to you, or even with a neighbor. The more you try it, the more confident you'll become.
Exactly, Ryan. And you don't need to put too much pressure on yourself either. Start in low-stakes situations, like a casual chat with a store clerk or someone in your neighborhood. These everyday conversations will build your confidence for those bigger moments when you really want to make a connection. You'll be surprised at how much easier it gets. The more you do it, the more natural it will feel. And soon enough, striking up a conversation with a stranger won't feel like a big deal at all.
Yes! And don't forget, it's all about having fun with it too. Conversations can lead to amazing connections, opportunities, or just brighten someone's day. So don't be afraid to get out there and give it a try. Start with a simple comment or question and see where it takes you. Practice a few of the scenarios we talked about today, and you'll be a pro at talking with strangers in no time.
Absolutely, and remember, every conversation is a chance to learn something new or make a connection you didn't expect. So don't hesitate. Next time you're around strangers, challenge yourself to start a conversation. You've got this.
All right, so we've talked about how to overcome the fear of talking to strangers, how to break the ice, keep the conversation flowing, and even how to exit gracefully when the time comes. I hope everyone listening feels a little more confident about striking up conversations with strangers, whether it's at a party, a networking event, or just while grabbing coffee. It's all about practice, right? The more you do it, the less intimidating it becomes. And just remember, it's totally normal to feel nervous at first. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll find that most people are more open to conversation than you might think.
Exactly, Ryan. And I want to remind our listeners, don't put too much pressure on yourself. If a conversation doesn't go the way you imagined, that's okay. Not every interaction needs to be amazing or life-changing. What matters is that you took the step and tried. The more you open up and engage, the more you'll learn about what works for you and what doesn't. Sometimes, even the simplest conversations can lead to unexpected connections or opportunities, but they all start with that first hello. So just keep practicing, and remember, every conversation is a new chance to connect.
Before we wrap up, here are a few quick tips to make conversations with strangers even smoother. First, be present. Don't get too caught up in what you're going to say next. Instead, focus on what the other person is saying and respond naturally. A smile and genuine eye contact can also make a huge difference in how approachable and open you seem. Be mindful of body language, both yours and theirs. If they seem engaged, that's great. But if they appear distracted, it might be time to exit politely. Finding common ground, whether it's a shared interest, a mutual acquaintance, or even something simple like the weather, makes the conversation more comfortable and enjoyable for both of you. And finally, don't hesitate to ask for help. People love to share their knowledge or recommendations, so if you're stuck, asking for advice can be a great way to keep the conversation going.
Those are great tips, Ryan. I'd also say, don't be afraid to introduce yourself first. Sometimes people are just waiting for a reason to engage, and a simple introduction like, "Hi, I'm Priya, by the way," can break the tension. And one more tip. Keep the conversation positive. People are more likely to open up when the vibe is light and friendly. Compliment something about their energy or share something upbeat. It makes people feel good. And that's what conversations are all about. So go out there, try these tips, and see how easy it can be to connect with new people.
Absolutely. That's a wrap for today's episode of Speak Up. We hope you feel inspired and ready to put these tips into action the next time you find yourself in a situation with someone new. And remember, starting a conversation is just the beginning. You never know where it might lead. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. We'd love to hear about your experiences trying these tips. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. And don't forget, each conversation is an opportunity to learn, grow, and connect. You've got the tools now, so go ahead and give it a try. We'll be back next week with more tips to help you speak up and communicate with confidence. Until then, keep practicing, stay curious, and most importantly, have fun with it. That's right. We'll catch you next time on Speak Up. Take care, everyone. See you next time.